Herman Skin Cree Nation, we have Chief Joel Mekat, Craig Mackinac, Councillor, Dr. Wilton Littlechild, and Council Clayton Leonard. And from the Kativik School Board, we have joining by video conference Harriet Kiluchak. So before we begin, I understand that the witnesses from Herman Skin Cree Nation have asked for 10 minutes for introductory remarks. The standing orders of this committee, or the typical practice, is that we do 5 minutes, and so in order to have 10 minutes, we will need unanimous consent of members in this committee. So I just want to ensure that we do have unanimous consent to do that before moving forward. Okay. Well, with that, I will turn it over to our the Herman Skin Cree Nation to deliver 10 minutes of opening remarks.
Yeah. Mio Kiksapayo, Tatum Scott now. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us to speak today about Bill C-61. Honestly, and it's very disappointing and frustrating that I have to be here today. As you know, the Herman Skin Cree Nation wants an amendment to the bill to recognize First Nations' right to safe drinking water. This means that all First Nations people live on reserved lands have a right to drinking water with no serious risks to human health and well-being. Nothing less will honor and uphold our treaty with Canada and respect our human rights. This is not just a legal issue. It matters every day in the lives of real people at Herman Skin. Canada has repeatedly promised to fix First Nations drinking water issues since 1970. And has failed over and over. Canada's best efforts promised to the bill are not good enough. Our people have experienced excuse me, Canada's neglect on our drinking water and their homes and their lives daily. For decades, I would like Councillor Mackinac, who has also worked on this issue for a long time, to give the committee a sense of unsafe drinking water crisis at Herman Skin. I will provide the short closing statement. Sir.
Good morning, Senate. I'd like to make some comments this morning. In 2010, Canada conducted the National Engineering Assessment of First Nations water systems. At Herman Skin, the assessment found that our water treatment plant, built in the 70s, failed to meet drinking water standards and badly needed to be replaced. The plant is still operating. About 70% of our families are not connected to the treatment plant. They get water from about 500 rural wells. The assessment found that every single tested well failed to meet the health requirements of drinking water standards. Fecal coliforms and E. coli were common. Canada was informed that that investment of about 80 million was needed at Herman Skin so our people could access safe drinking water. To this day, Canada has failed to implement any of the key recommendations of the assessment, with awful consequences. From 2010 to 2022, there have been 361 drinking water advisories on about 500 wells. Excuse me. 73% of our homes. Even worse, 232 of those drinking water advisories were longer than a year, and almost 80 are effectively permanent. 3 families even live with do not consume orders on their wells. These records have been provided to the committee. Herman Skin, for our part, has invested lots of time, energy, and resources trying to find a solution. When Canada failed to act on the 2010 assessment, Herman Skin started on the first legal actions on safe drinking water in 2014. We willingly put the legislation in abeyance to work with Canada to find solutions. Canada first tried to push the cheapest short-term solution possible. After 4 years, Canada finally agreed to apply the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines and study what is actually needed to ensure safe drinking water for our people. The negotiations ended earlier in this year because Canada said the 361 drinking water advisories didn't matter because they are on wells and not our water plant. Canada refuses to fund the solution recommended by qualified engineers that is needed to get safe drinking water to all of the families at Herman Skin, which is certainly treated water piped to all of our homes. 10 years of negotiations ended in February when Canada effectively said, "Too bad." Despite the frustration and complete lack of action by Canada on our drinking water systems, Herman Skin invested heavily in engagement on Bill C-61. We were hopeful that when Canada told us at the first meeting on September 22 that it wanted to develop new legislation to finally address unsafe drinking water at Herman Skin and all First Nations. Canada told us, and I quote from their own document, "We are committed to affirm and recognize the rights of First Nations." Specifically, Canada said it intended to address the non-recognition of First Nations water rights in former legislation. Finally, we thought Canada is ready to do what's needed to do what's right, to recognize that First Nations have a right to safe drinking water. And after all, the bill is about safe drinking water. Herman Skin worked with Dr. Littlechild, a leading expert on the UN Declaration, and Professor David Percy, former Dean of Law at the U of A, Canada's leading water law expert and advisor to the Waitangi Tribunal on Maori water rights, so we could provide Canada with the best possible input. We held 5 all-day council sessions on the bill, met many times with Canada, and provided 6 written submissions on the bill. Although we are pleased that it recognizes that our water is part of our reserve land and that we have a broader right of self-government over our water, Canada has failed on the most important issue. A law meant to ensure that First Nations have access to safe drinking water must recognize our right to safe drinking. Many First Nations, including Herman Skin, have suffered too long from Canada's best efforts. It is absolutely critical that Bill C-61 recognizes that First Nations have a right to safe drinking water. Chief Mycat will provide final comments.
I need to be clear and firm on this issue. Canada has violated treaty and the human rights to our families, children, and elders by failing to act on unsafe drinking water crisis at Herman Skin. Our long and patient efforts to work with Canada on solutions, including this bill, have only resulted in more inaction, failure, and half measures. The Herman Skin Cree Nation has had enough. We will carry through our litigation against Canada until First Nations' right to safe drinking water is the law. Every person at Herman Skin can turn on the tap in their home, office, school, and not worry about if the water threatens their health and well-being. Amended Bill C-61 recognized First Nations' right to safe drinking water is a requirement that is long overdue. This would also be a positive step toward resolving Herman Skin's case against Canada, maybe similar lawsuits like Shamawata and Six Nations. Real reconciliation starts with ending Canada's violation of our treaty and every First Nation's right to safe drinking water. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask committee members questions, but I will anyways. Herman Skin and probably all First Nations across want to hear from each of you if you support our right to safe drinking water.
Great. Thank you very much for